So I watched Malcolm and Marie, and I have some things to say about it. Before I start, all of this stuff is really just my opinion, and also if the audio sounds crunchy, I'm very sorry. This is my first video. I do not know what I'm doing. Let's go. For the sake of context, Malcolm is an energetic film director, and Marie, his girlfriend, is a recovered addict that appears to be stricken with a terrible bout of ennui. This movie is meant to analyze the couple's relationship by subjecting the viewers to about an hour and a half of brutal roundabout arguments that begin when Marie reveals that she's angry at Malcolm for not thanking her during his speech at the premiere of a movie that he based partially on her personal struggles with addiction. The movie stars John David Washington and Zendaya and was directed by Sam Levinson. I don't want this review to come across as me bashing the entire movie, so I'll start by noting some of the things that I did like. I liked Zendaya's beautiful dress. I thought the acting was good, especially John David Washington. I do not want to hear any John David Washington slander on this day. I thought the movie was beautifully shot, and I thought the soundtrack was bussin'. So now on to the things that I did not like. I didn't like the wavering, sort of non-committal tone, the underdeveloped characters / the lack of chemistry between the actors. Well, I think the former is more responsible for the disjointed feeling of the movie. I did want to mention the lack of chemistry because I just felt like there was none. And then my largest issues, the dialogue and the race talk, which don't shoot me, I will get into that later. Tone. I'm not sure if non-committal is the correct descriptor for whatever tone this movie had or was attempting to achieve. Also, I really don't know what could have been done to fix it, or even if I have exactly pinpointed my issues throughout, but I thought I should mention it because the tone was an issue for me. I think if the tone had been more intense, urgent, and desperate, I would have been more invested in the two characters. So as we all know, the movie is in black and white, which I have no problems with. I watched The Lighthouse, Willem should have gotten his awards. He should have, and it's a shame that he didn't get any, but we're not talking about that right now. We're talking about Malcolm and Marie. So for this movie to be in black and white, and within literally the first 3 minutes, we get a woman peeing on the toilet scene. Y'all, it felt like a gut punch. Not a woman peeing on the toilet scene. Not that. Because I really saw this trailer and was like, oh my God, Zendaya is in a black and white movie. Let me get this artsy Zendaya. Allow me to get this artsy Zendaya. I was so excited. And then we get a woman peeing on the toilet scene. Are you joking? Directed by a white man? Are you kidding? For those of you who do not know what I'm talking about, it's sort of a reoccurring thing with indie, quote unquote indie, male directors having a woman sit on the toilet and pee, and you can hear her pee. And they did exactly that. It hurt, but sorry, that was like a side note. But as I mentioned, I thought this movie was very pretty to look at. It was beautiful and the music was great, but literally this movie looked and felt like a perfume commercial. The people in the commercial are very beautiful and they are certainly moving around and things are definitely being said, but nothing is happening and nothing is getting done. Therefore, for me, the visuals and the way this movie was shot seemed to do little for the tone and overall feel of the movie. And I don't think that camera work needs to be highly stylized in order to get a certain tone or feeling across in a movie. But since the tone does feel so undefined and kind of all over the place, perhaps a different style of camera work could have prompted more feelings of urgency and intensity. The shots in this movie are long and lingering, and some are very close, which I thought worked for the scenes in between arguments where the two characters would suddenly like each other again, and they're kissing all up on each other. I thought that was perfect for that. But the events in the movie take place within a few hours, and because of that, I would expect that the director had a goal of making it feel claustrophobic and uncomfortable and tense, and because it's all set in one place. And I think all of these things would only help to elevate all of the work that John David and Zendaya were doing, and also could have helped generate some fake chemistry where I felt there was none in reality. Instead, the movie simply feels drawn out, and since the camera work is lingering and slow, it really doesn't do anything to emphasize the high amounts of energy that are being expelled by the two leads. This brings me to the second thing I disliked about this movie, which I also feel contributes largely to the lack of definitive tone and my inability to connect to the characters. This is the underdevelopment of the characters. Underdevelopment. The characters within this movie and the relationship between these characters feels really underbaked to me, and I cannot tell if this is solely because of the underdevelopment on the part of the writers or if it has something to do with the lack of chemistry between the two main actors. I will focus on the underdevelopment because it is something that I can pinpoint, but I just wanted to mention the lack of chemistry because I also felt it was something that made it hard for me to attach myself to the story. Perhaps more developed writing could have increased the amount of chemistry between the actors. Or something. I don't know. The movie begins with Malcolm and Marie coming back home from Malcolm's movie premiere. This is when we first get to see hints of Malcolm's explosive personality. He's super excited about the premiere, as he should be, and we also get hints of what Zendaya's character, Marie, will be serving throughout the entire movie, most of the movie. I can only describe this as a weird mixture of indifference and some sort of detachment. And it was in this first scene that I kind of questioned whether these characters like each other at all. For example, while Malcolm is raving about the positive reviews he's heard of his film so far, Marie is giving grunts of acknowledgement as she casually smokes a cigarette. She seems very bored of it all, which, as I said, led me to wonder whether this couple loves each other, and in the end kind of just resulted in a lot of lines that I guess were supposed to be like deep cuts and make the audience kind of gasp and feel badly for these characters, but in the end everything kind of felt shallow, unsurprising, and flat. So as a reminder, this scene occurs in the very beginning of the film before the audience even knows that the movie Malcolm has created was based on Marie's life story. So, for Marie to seem detached or annoyed is justified once we know that. But I think a more effective way to lead the audience down this rocky road of Malcolm and Marie's relationship would have been to show Marie at least trying to feign support for her boyfriend's movie, and then within minutes, showing her supportive facade breaking as she expresses her anger at him for not thanking her at the premiere. I think this would have been a good way to show the audience that there was love somewhere in their relationship in spite of the couple's flaws. Instead, beginning the movie with Marie already annoyed with Malcolm, who comes across as someone who is simply genuinely excited for the perceived success of his film, makes Marie seem nitpicky and annoying when that's simply not the case. In fact, her anger is completely justified. She has essentially given up some of her most painful and harrowing parts of her life for public consumption. As a result, her boyfriend will now gain fame off of her life and will be applauded for telling a story that did not belong to him in the first place. And he doesn't even have the awareness to thank her at the premiere. You'll be on site. It's just a shame that these characters and their relationship didn't feel more fleshed out. I mean, even with those seemingly loving scenes that occurred between each of their arguments, the relationship did not feel fully realized at all. In fact, I think the insertion of those scenes just added to the repetitive and formulaic feel of the movie. In the end, it was just tiring to watch. So now on to my main issue, the dialogue. I mentioned earlier that in between Malcolm and Marie's arguments, there are scenes that I guess are meant to show that they do have love for one another, but because all of these scenes in the movie are sequential and all happen within that one night, it just feels really formulaic and faked for the sake of showing that they can get along. The dialogue does not help. A lot of it is just unrealistic and weird, so it simply added to the reasons why I felt like I had a hard time connecting to these characters. In an early scene, Malcolm is discussing his distaste for the language used by white film critics when critiquing black art. Malcolm says, quote, "This film is an acute study of the horrors," they like to use words like that, "the horrors of systemic racism in this mental health care industry," instead of it being a commercial film about a drug-addicted girl trying to get her together. I mean, these effing people are so pedantic. Now, I don't know why, but something about the use of the word pedantic really bothered me. You guys are literally complaining about the way these movies are discussed with an unnecessarily decorated language. And yes, I know they are specifically discussing the way that white critics critique black art with the constant lens of it being solely a mouthpiece for the collective black experience rather than just black art. But he just used pedantic in casual conversation, which nobody does that. Like, I didn't even know what that word meant. I had to use context clues to figure it out. The use of that word in particular to me just felt counterintuitive to the entire purpose of what he was trying to explain. And it really just felt out of place, which is kind of an ongoing thing throughout this movie. Like, all of the language seems very, it's over scripted to me, and it seems unnatural. There's another part that sticks out to me during the macaroni and cheese scene, which, let's discuss that for a second. First of all, Kraft mac and cheese has a 3-second lifespan. Okay, 3 seconds. Marie pours the mac and cheese into a bowl straight out of the pot at around the movie's 13-minute mark. Malcolm don't sit down to eat it until around the 16.5 to 17-minute mark in the movie. Baby, it's expired. It is expired. There is no reason for him to be tearing it up like that. On a serious note, while Malcolm is devouring this macaroni and cheese like an uninhibited and ill-mannered child, he is arguing with Marie, who is out of the room, so he's essentially yelling at her with his mouth full while she's nowhere to be found. She's somewhere in another part of the house. That is, until she returns to say, and I quote, "Do you know how disturbing it is that you can compartmentalize to such a degree that you can abuse me while eating mac and cheese?" Whew, this line. Okay. I understand why it was said, why the mac and cheese was mentioned. It was intended to highlight Marie's perception of Malcolm, which is that he is careless and self-centered, but something about it felt very fake and, it was just stupid. And I'm not sure where to place the blame. It could just be that the writing is just bad. Like, a lot of the dialogue did sound like it was trying too hard to be clever. Specifically, this line sounded like it could have come out of a 14-year-old Tumblr fanfic writer's piece of work. But, I'm not sure if that means the writing overall was bad. And even if that was the case, I feel like there could have been things done to compensate for the robotic tone of the dialogue, which would have also aided in the further development of the characters. For example, during this scene where Malcolm is tearing up this old nasty Kraft macaroni and cheese, the camera, instead of staying on Malcolm while he nastily eats this food, the camera could have followed Marie to wherever she was in the house while he's yelling at her, berating her, and calling her quote-unquote unstable, and maybe we, as the audience, could have seen a genuine reaction from her as a result of those hurtful words. Something like this would have provided us with something to grasp onto as we dive further into the nitty-gritty of this couple's relationship. Because honestly, up until this point, all we have seen is Marie be rather indifferent and bored. But I think if we would have seen her character more engaged, it would have only added to the sense of narcissism and self-righteousness that we would get from Malcolm's character. That is not to say that Marie as a woman should be emotional, enraged, or dramatically revealing her emotions or anything like that. But I think any person would be hurt if the things that were said to Marie were said to them by someone they love. And it would have been interesting if we were shown that part of her, especially because she's on the receiving end of a lot of hurtful words for most of the movie. Creating an intimate moment between Marie and the audience without Malcolm's physical presence would have been a powerful way to show how his words cut in a way that is separate from the repetitive face-to-face arguments between the couple. I felt constantly throughout this movie that I was being told, yes, these two people do love each other, and what they are saying matters to one another. But to me, it didn't really show in a way that felt genuine and convincing. So the race talk. Okay, my final issue was the race talk, and not even the discussion of race itself, but the frequency of it throughout the film, as well as Sam Levinson's use of a black male character to veil what are actually his own issues with Hollywood. I watched this movie with my sister, and there were a couple parts where John David said the N-word, and we both kind of looked at each other at the same time, and we're like, not a white man writing this. Like, okay, Quentin Tarantino. I'm kidding. I understand that both Zendaya and John had a lot to do with the realization of these characters, and I'm sure a lot of influence over the script, so whatever, that's not what I actually had the problem with. That's not what the issue was. At the time of watching the movie, I wasn't able to pinpoint what it was exactly that had bothered me so much about Malcolm's rant about the white female reviewer. She gave his movie a good review, comparing him to other notable black directors, but to me, it felt overdone. This is not to say that there is a problem with a black man complaining about the whiteness of Hollywood, because it's a valid complaint, but to me, a black woman, it felt false to me for two reasons. My first inherent thought was that this is a black man talking to a black woman. In the movie, it is reiterated that Marie has faced additional struggles as a young female addict trying to get clean because of her blackness. So why is it necessary for him to over-explain his issues with white reviewers for the second time? Because we already went through this in the beginning, actually, when they first arrive home and Malcolm is expressing his excitement over the positive reviews, and Marie refers to those reviewers as quote-unquote pedantic. But even after viewing the movie, I still felt a little off, not strictly by the repetition of it, but by something else, I guess. So I looked it up just to see if there was anyone else who felt similarly to me and found this article entitled How Using a Black Actor to Vent White Frustration Sinks Malcolm and Marie by Robert Daniels of The Guardian. And it really illuminated some things for me. So if you haven't seen the movie, essentially there is this long-winded scene, they're all long-winded, but whatever, where Malcolm is reading a review of his newly premiered movie, and though the review is a glowing review, he's got a bone to pick with the white woman who reviewed it. This white female critic denounces the way Malcolm revels in the violence against women in his film. A critique that Robert Daniels points out easily applies to Sam Levinson's 2018 film Assassination Nation, only for Malcolm to retort that certain journalists are only trying to predict the culture. In this quote, in the same article by Robert Daniels, Daniels states Malcolm continues unencumbered to vent about the supposed lack of artistic freedom felt by male directors to represent trauma on screen or to assume different vantage points other than their own racial or sexual background. Washington and Zendaya, notwithstanding, were given latitude to improvise their lines. Levinson, however, in the end, is the one teeing up the conversations and giving final approval, end quote. Basically, Levinson uses Malcolm as a vehicle to communicate his issues with critics to his audience, and I don't know if this was meant to change the way people view his movies or what, but to me, it makes his other efforts to discuss black media and the way that it is perceived by white critics seem kind of disingenuous. And maybe that's just me, but I just think it's interesting that even before knowing about Levinson's own personal connections to the words being spoken by Malcolm, I felt that there was something a little bit fake about it. In another quote from the same article, Daniel states that undercurrent detracts from many of the saleable points he brings up, white critics approaching black art through the lens of importance rather than black art being important in and of itself. However, Levinson makes Malcolm and Marie in its self-victimizing the cinematic equivalent of having your chocolate cake and eating it too. So I can't really help but feel that, like, in saying all of this in Malcolm and Marie, Sam Levinson is trying to sort of get critics to view his film with a little more, I guess, levity, grace, and forgiveness. In an interview with Olivia Ovenden of Esquire, Sam Levinson said that he did not feel any anxiety about expressing a black man's issues with white Hollywood's view of black movies because of his, quote, respect for the collaborative nature of filmmaking. Essentially, he says that if he were to say something that felt false, he had faith within Zendaya or John David to say something about it and correct him, which is fine. Like I said before, I've heard that this movie was very collaborative, and yeah, so that's fine and good, but that does not explain the fact that I felt like something about it seemed a little false. This is not at the fault of John David, but I think perhaps my knowledge that this was a white writer putting words in the mouth of a black man that kind of set it off kilter for me. And then to learn that these points made in the film about critics and their interpretations of directors' visions, as well as a woman's opinion on the way male directors direct women, or like the sexualized, hyper-violent lens that male directors can put on women, are similar to the points that a female critic made about one of Sam Levinson's other movies. It just didn't sit right with me. And that's all I'll say on that. So here are my conclusions. This movie could have been so good. Like, the concept of watching two flawed people kind of duke it out and like actually argue over things that really do matter. Oh my God. Because think about it, like Marie's argument is very justified. If you had given up some of what is presumably the most harrowing, heartbreaking, and difficult times of your life to your partner to put in a movie, therefore making it like for public consumption, it's no longer yours, and then he like blatantly underappreciates you. Bye. Because this subject matter is such a deep cut for Marie's character, these really hurtful jabs between the two characters make sense, so it's not like the degree of each character's anger or the explosiveness of Malcolm's character feels wrong. The problem, to me, lies in a lack of developed relationship between the characters, the systematic and repetitive nature of the story, as well as the systematic and repetitive and weird dialogue, the lack of a strong tone, and then like those weird one-liners that made Zendaya seem like she's a bad actress, which I don't think she is. And then obviously the white director's weird use of a black character as a mouthpiece for his issues with Hollywood. It was too much for me. And I did not like it. And I will not be watching it again. Anyways, the articles I mentioned will be linked in the description. Thank you for watching.